Every September, English fishermen, burley bucks from the coal mines of Yorkshire came for fresh air, and I was freed from the master and the Irish and his quick questions. In the back of a station wagon, jammed with tackle and jammed between two miners that talked like a prayer book and ate cheese and onion sandwiches, I headed off to Killishandra for the day. All the men had 3 fishing rods and 6 rod rests and 10 quiver tips and 50 floats and 100 hooks and pliers and disgorgers and keep nets and landing nets and lead weights and reel catapults for firing a handful of maggots out where the float was to drive the bream mad. And chicken feed for the fish and flasks of tea and sandwiches and umbrellas. Everything had to be tramped through gates and over stiles and across fields of waist-high wet rushes, wet coats and waders flailing to the fishing spot. There they set me up with a rod that was twice my size and showed me how to tie on a fish hook and hook on maggots so they didn't burst and set afloat and catch rudd and roach and perch and bream that we threw back. Once I caught an eel and I wasn't supposed to catch an eel and he tangled everything, but I brought him home with a hook still in him and a line and 2 lead beads on it dangling from his mouth. And my mother said she wouldn't cook it because they wriggled on the pan even if you cut the head off. Bring it down there to Joe Ganley, he'll eat anything that way. And I did. And Joe was delighted with it. I noticed he had wire sauce out on the table. I thought that my mother was right, he'd eat anything that way. And I didn't know how she knew Joe Ganley would eat eels. Weights and Measures said fishing was a science and an art. There was that much to learn, and he was right. How do you know where to set the float on the line so the hook was at the right depth? How do you know how many of the little lead balls do you clamp on the line to get the float to stay upright in the water? And how do you know when to use a float and when to use a bomb? It was a science, an art. A bomb was a pear-shaped lead weight with a wire eye in it. How would you know by looking at the lake that the fishing would be good? And a bream, big, fat, flat and yellow-bellied like a pup that died from chicken bones, was easy enough to recognise, but how could you tell the difference between a rudd, a roach and a perch? It was a science. And I learned to tie a fisherman's knot that was like a hangman's noose on the tiniest of hooks, the number 19, and it wasn't even the smallest. And these miners with fingers like sausages and them tying on the delicate hook. And to get 2 maggots to dangle on that hook without bursting them, Weights and Measures was right. It was a science and an art. And they had scales for weighing the big one when you caught him. And what if you caught a pike? Would he pull in? But these boys didn't fish for pike. It was the northern boys went for the pike. Down at the weekends, down for pike, down from Hollywood and Bangor with names like Roy and Big Alec. The Protestants took their pike by day and the Provosts took everything else by night. Bream, rudd, roach and perch to sell in London's fancy restaurants. Or maybe for cat and dog food. Same difference, somebody said. And the Burn the Bus belonged with English fishermen in Ballinamore. Everyone knows who done it. That was the sort of the Ballinamores. And the threatened Father Tighe, the curate who was out in the lake with a shotgun and a flashlamp trying to stop them. But Father Tighe had a tooth missing for holding his pipe, and he could talk and smoke at the same time, and spent years out farming, and he wasn't afraid. And he denounced them from the altar for the netting, and said they'd clean out the lake, and that they were getting help from the locals. And I wondered who the locals were. But Uncle Gerald, who came from America, had no interest in maggots or chicken feed. He chewed gum, said the worm was your only man, and drove into Cork to buy a tin of worms off the tinkers on the marina for £1. A penny a worm, they said. There's 100 worms in the tin, sir. How he could come from America and know to buy worms off the tinkers on the marina, I never knew. I never heard of such a thing, and I lived there all my life. And Uncle Gerald just had 1 rod, and it was a short one, and he could put it in the car already set up, and he had spare hooks and weights in little plastic pouches in his pocket. And he wasn't going to tramp half a mile through wet rushes and mucky gaps to get to the lake when you could fish there and then off the marine in white shorts and white runners and white t-shirts. And you didn't have to be out for a whole day sitting on a basket and eating sandwiches and catching cold. And he didn't bother with floats or chicken feed and just bomb fished all the time. And he didn't care what he caught. And if a fish got away, he'd inspect the half a worm in the palm of his hand and laugh and chew his gum and call out across the shannon to the fish, "You little cocksuckers." And he didn't bother with umbrellas either. If it rained, you could just sit into the car until it cleared, or drive up the town in Carrick, spotting the Germans in their big yellow raincoats and yellow lanterns. And he said, you can always tell the tourists in Ireland, the ones wearing the raincoats. I was telling him a lie about the raincoats, and he said the Germans were taking all the pike back to Germany and cleaning out the lake. They could pay for their holiday with them. The Germans liked their pike, but nobody I knew, well, except maybe Joe Ganley, who'd eat wire sauce, would eat pike, because they were dirty things and they ate rubbish and rats and pregnant terriers. I knew Joe Ganley shot pike all right, because he was in our house drinking hot brandy on Stephen's Day with his gun and belt of cartridges left by the fire, and I wanted rid of him because I was afraid the whole house would explode, and the whole house would go up with the thatch roof, and I thought I'd have to bar him from coming in with his gun and cartridges. He said he was shooting pike when they came in big and fat into the reeds to spawn, or to eat bags of pups, I thought. That's what you did with pups you didn't want, or maybe kittens you didn't want. Put them in a bag and throw them across the bridge at the galley into the Shannon. And if a stray dog walked into your yard and you didn't get rid of it, you couldn't get rid of it, you put him in the boot and brought him to Ballyfarnan and let him out there. Ballyfarnan's in Roscommon. It was then I knew Father Tighe had his hands full and his work cut out for him with the Provos and the Germans, trying to make sure there'd be enough pike and perch for the miners and the Protestants. Because the miners and the Protestants drank a few pints and spent a few pounds, not like the Germans, who brought their beer and food from Germany and annoyed everyone because they sucked all night from one glass of Guinness between two and annoyed the local musicians with bad Bowron playing. They didn't have the nya, and that was worse than the hippies with their guitars and leather wristbands, or the Americans looking for ice.